One of the most tragic characters in all of the Batman universe is Mr. Freeze. And how could his story be adapted into the Batman Part 2? Who is Mr. Freeze, and what makes him so compelling? Right now, fans across the globe are trying to figure out exactly what Matt Reeves has in store for us for the Batman Part 2. And one of the largest blanks that is yet to be filled is the sequel's villain. Batman has no shortage of iconic villains, and the Reeves universe has already done a fantastic job at bringing several of them to life, in a relatively short amount of time too, so fans are very vocal about what preferences and wishes they have for the sequel. The general consensus as far as fans are concerned now seems to be that either the Court of Owls or Mr. Freeze should be the next villain. For the time being, this is mostly based on what fans want, and is not rooted in any firm evidence, but we still wanted to talk about the story of Mr. Freeze, and how an adaptation of the iconic comic book character could look in Reeves' Batman universe. So today, let's do just that. It's no secret that Mr. Freeze's last adaptation is not remembered very fondly, but it's a product of both the time and the tone of the project that was being made. Needless to say, a redemption arc may be appropriate for Freeze at some point in the future. Our story begins with a man by the name of Victor, a brilliant cryogenicist who was pioneering different ways to preserve human life. As a boy, he wanted to learn how to freeze animals in order to keep them alive longer, and even though this was a concern to his parents, and that he did more harm to animals than good as a child, his heart was in the right place. His research eventually revolved around the idea that every disease had a cure, even if that cure had not been discovered or created yet. So many people who died before their time were victims of the age in which they were born. At Victor's side was his loving wife Nora, who found Victor as a relatively isolated and introverted boarding school student, and the two developed an immediate connection. When Nora was diagnosed with a terminal, degenerative condition, Victor scrambled to find any possible cure, and when he discovered that the modern age did not have an answer to his wife's illness, he did the only thing that he could think of. He placed her into a cryogenesis tank, hoping that he would prolong her life long enough to find a cure eventually. At the time, he was backed by the CEO of a conglomerate known as Gothcorp by the name of Ferris Boyle, and with Boyle's support, he was able to fund his wife's preservation. But then he ran into a problem. Victor was running out of evidence that he could actually make advancements, and Boyle ended up pulling the plug on Victor's experiments and his funding. Without funding or power, Nora would eventually die, though Victor knew that a breakthrough was imminent and was determined to keep her alive. Victor tried to stop Boyle from shutting down the lab, which resulted in a malfunction that was then triggered and an explosion went off of cryogenic fluid and ice, with Victor miraculously surviving the explosion. Instead of simply surviving, Victor was permanently transformed into a cold-blooded husk who could no longer survive room temperature. His physiology had been altered so severely that he had to remain in freezing conditions in order to simply survive, even though he retained full mobility in all of his senses. In order to survive in the outside world though, he had to construct a suit which would contain him and keep his body below freezing at all times, which, much like Darth Vader, this suit was now a show of strength and a badge of honor, but also the object of his anger and rage. It was a prison, a tomb that holds Freeze in place indefinitely, because without it, he would die within minutes of being in just a comfortable room. By this point, Nora's condition had severely worsened due to the lab explosion, and he was without support or money. He had no funds whatsoever, no resources, and no way to continue his research, and so he took his suit and resorted to criminal means. What we have to remember about Freeze is that he is an inherently tragic character who does not commit crimes because he finds joy or satisfaction in them. Going by the name Mr. Zero, he first started robbing banks in order to get the money necessary to finance the research he needed to simply save his wife. But he never set out to hurt anybody. All of his crimes have been committed with the intention of gathering resources, whether they are financial or technological, but very rarely does he actually set out with the intention to hurt anyone. In fact, he's actually been rather helpful to Batman in the past, such as the Heart of Hush story, where Hush cut out Catwoman's heart, but it was then Freeze's cryogenic chamber that kept her alive and on life support until Batman could figure out a way to stop Hush and save Selina. Compared to the rest of Batman's rogues, he is inherently a kinder character who commits crimes because he has no other option. He is a victim of circumstance more so than just about anyone that Batman has ever fought. Very few of his villains have ever had this level of sympathy before. I think this would be a great departure from the Riddler's motivations, who are rather gruesome in nature in the first Batman outing. Same with a character like Oz Cobb in The Penguin. But back to the story. Freeze eventually created a gun that would subdue his targets without any permanent damage, which is why he chooses to freeze people instead of outright killing them. In actuality, freezing somebody solid would be lethal, or at the very least, would have a ton of adverse effects. A lot of the comics, though, tend to just wave this out of the way. Given Matt Reeves' commitment to realism within the universe of the Batman, though, it's interesting to imagine what an adaptation of Freeze would look like, since Reeves is more likely to showcase these side effects. Don't put it past Matt Reeves to showcase severe frostbite, or hypothermia that would come with prolonged exposure to the bitter cold if Freeze is the main villain. Physically speaking, his powers would have to be adapted properly in order for this adaptation to fit with the universe. But tonally speaking, I think Mr. Freeze is actually a perfect option. He is an inherently tragic figure who is eternally locked in his suit. Mr. Freeze only lives to further his research to save his wife's life. He's fascinating because he doesn't spend money or resources looking for a cure for his own condition. He only ever seems to care about Nora, and anyone who gets hurt is an accidental tragedy that was never planned on. The Batman Part 2 has been confirmed to take place in wintertime in Gotham, and while this isn't a requirement, it would be the perfect backdrop for a character like Freeze. A story involving Freeze would place Bruce firmly in the middle of a much more complicated moral and an ethical issue. His goal is to help people now, to be a symbol that can be relied on to not only punish crime, but to protect innocence as well. If Freeze is committing crimes, then it's Batman's job to stop him. But what if the best way to stop him is actually to help him finish the job? Wayne has the funding and resources to help Freeze get his research back on track. But at what point does Batman step in? And at what point does Batman step back in order to let Bruce Wayne be the hero? They each have an ability to interfere in Freeze's operation, just in very different ways. So measuring the amount of harm he's doing compared to what could be accomplished if Bruce helps him is an interesting conundrum, and a great quandary. These are all fascinating questions that could be explored in Batman 2. We've mentioned before how we would like to see Bruce take a much more active role in Gotham's social needs, so this could be a perfect avenue to showcase Bruce Wayne and his side of how he could help Gotham. We've talked a lot about this in our other video covering No Man's Land, and our other video about theories of what Batman is up to during the events of the Penguin. But the basic premise is that we believe that Bruce Wayne is gearing up for a redemption of his own. He has the power to truly make change, but he didn't understand that yet. And we believe he's about to take a much more active role in public affairs as a champion and a philanthropist of the people, rather than a representative of the rich elite. It would also help us to understand the dynamic of why and when Gotham needs Bruce and when they need Batman, because make no mistake, in order for Gotham to truly heal, it needs both of them. Batman is the deliverer of justice who goes where Bruce Wayne cannot, and Bruce has the power to make systemic change that punching muggers will never accomplish. They exist together for a reason. They are equally as integral to the survival and the stabilization of Gotham. And the Batman had a stranglehold on Bruce for the entire first film. Bruce Wayne is a recluse who hardly shows up in the film. Yet now, we need to see just what he is capable of. And while Batman figures out his place in the system, using Freeze as a way to show the complexity of Gotham's underbelly could be a fantastic way to take the next movie. And we believe that the fans are campaigning for Freeze to appear in the universe could be onto something very special. But anyway, friends, what are your thoughts on Mr. Freeze, Victor Freeze being a part of the Batman universe? And do you think that he could be a compelling character for both Bruce Wayne and Batman to go up against? As always, my friends, subscribe to the channel for more DC, Marvel, and Batman lore, and have a great day.